Okay. I think recording has started. All right. So here's I really like the way this poet put it. We entangle ourselves in knots of our own making and struggle, lonely and confused. This is what the things can teach us: to fall, patiently to trust our heaviness. Even a bird has to do that before he can fly. That is our journey. I think that certainly has been mine. And the little idea and some of the sources here, Soulcraft, of course, is one of them, but he refers a lot to this book by Joseph Campbell, who actually, I think he died in 87 or something like that. But this book was published maybe in the 40s. So it's been around a while. Research he did on Greek mythology or universal mythology, the hero with 1,000 faces. And then Richard Rohr's book called Falling Upward addresses some of this, especially with Homer's Iliad, which interestingly enough, Campbell didn't include, or at least Plotkin didn't include. But what he does is goes through several different examples of myths or mythology stories from various cultures. And let me just show you this. So Orpheus in Greek mythology, Greeks told the tale of this skilled musician who travels to Hades to find and revive his dead bride, Eurydice. And if I screw up these names and you know them better, you feel free to say it. While taking her back to the daylight world, he loses her again when he disobeys the god's order that told him not to turn around. But he turned around to make sure that she was still there, and he lost her. Reminded me of the Lot's wife story. And then Persephone, abducted by Hades. This was the daughter of the fertility goddess Demeter, abducted by Hades, lord of the dark underworld, to be his bride. And it was much later than that Zeus finally decides to send Hermes to rescue her, but she must still spend a third of each year below. So rescued, but not quite all rescued. And then Beowulf, Anglo-Saxon Norseman tale. He was this hero warrior who descends into a dreadful swamp to do battle with the monster of all monsters, Grendel's mother. But Beowulf slays the beast, but returns as part monster himself. And then there's Inanna, a Sumerian myth of this goddess of heaven, Inanna, who descends into the netherworld to confront her dark sister, the goddess Irshikigel. And so she kills Inanna and hangs her corpse on a peg. But two mourners are sent, and the god of the water and wisdom secure Inanna's release, but Inanna must send a substitute to take her place in the netherworld. And then there's this Nubian myth, and Nubia was just south of Egypt. In fact, during the combined period, the Nubians took over Egypt, and these were the black pharaohs. But this was a Saharan African tale of a young woman who, because of her beauty, is spurned by the other women of the village. But in her despair, she descends to the bottom of a river, a very dangerous place, by the way. And by the way, that's true also, like in going to Israel, one of the things that we learned going on the Sea of Galilee and the story of the storms coming up and then going right over to the other side, where there's this story of Jesus meeting a demoniac and cast out the demons, and they were tied to this underwater mythical tradition that's very ancient. So she descends to the bottom of the river, a very dangerous place where she encounters a repulsive old woman covered with horrible sores. And she asks the young woman to lick her wounds, kind of a test of her humility. And she does, and is thereby saved from the monster of the depths. And she returns to the village with some gifts to give to the people because of her success in this process. Okay, I have to tell you, in my traditional conservative background, mythology of any kind, Greek mythology especially, never was interesting to me. I just thought it was just pure heresy and wasn't very helpful to anything. I'm coming to the point of realizing that the truth is that our evangelical heritage doesn't come in a vacuum. It's like not all this is like this direct revelation from God that came out of nowhere. Like we're just, this is all, it's brand new stuff. It's not. But the question is, as I look at this, there are some themes that I discovered. I think I first started thinking about this in moral injury when I thought, we can't be the first people that thought of PTSD or shell shock or all those things that we are treating now like it's a brand new thing. Like that goes back to Homer's Odyssey, who came back with PTSD and some moral injury, and he goes through a very similar tales, some of these themes that get repeated. So a lot of work has been done with Campbell on his themes that he comes up with and studying all these myths. And he looks at some common, consistent themes that go through the myth. I think that what's helpful to me is that I deal with veterans all day who are going through a very similar story. And what I'm starting to realize is that this problem of pain is not a new problem, nor is, as people looked at it and wrote stories about it, they began to see that this problem of pain is ancient as people. And the common themes that they found are what Campbell puts together in this kind of graphic, where he says that there are three main themes that show up. And one is this theme of leaving home. And then the second stage is a theme of crossing the threshold into the underworld. And then the third theme is the return back home as a new person. And what he's trying to do is unravel, okay, so what happens in this progression? How does the person deal with their pain? And so he talks about starting in the underworld. So Plotkin says, if we would embark on the underworld adventure, where our dark beliefs and motives, our shadow missions, I think Jung started that idea, or Ortberg really develops that. It begins the same way it does in myth. It begins by leaving home. And home is the commonplace world and roles that you're familiar with. It's your way of understanding yourself and your world. They're not, it's a very closed system, our world. And so when we leave home, we're leaving something that's comfortable and we're moving into something that's very uncomfortable. My camera thinks this is a poignant moment, so it came in. Let me pull it back. I think of some of the things of leaving home for me, like literally, was going to college. I moved from Chicago to South Carolina to go to school. And I remember how big of a change it was. At first, it was kind of an adventure, but I called mom all the time because that was my connection back home. And that was a big change. I remember leaving seminary in Texas, where my wife's family was and where my first child was born, and moving to Montana. And by the way, in case you didn't know it, that's a very different culture, Texas, from Montana. And I was like plugged into this whole new world, kind of an adventure, but at the same time, very scary. Leaving pastoral world and the church world to go into chaplaincy, very a difficult thing for me, especially this whole thing called multi-faith chaplaincy. Like I have to represent people of faith that I don't believe in. Like, how does that work? So this leaving home, this ordinary world, happens all the time for us. But that we try to insulate. Well, I say we, I'm going to move it from universal to me. I try to insulate myself from change. I want stability. I want predictability. I kind of like that, enjoy it. Campbell says in mythology, that's the first step into this adventure. The second is a call to adventure. The hero is faced with an event or a conflict or a problem or a challenge that makes them begin their adventure. And the third step is this refusal of that. I mean, like, think about this idea of like even Abraham being called to leave his country and his religion and his family, and he leaves, but not all of it. He drags his nephew along with him and some other, his father, and he leaves, but not quite leaving, kind of thing. So it's this refusal of the call. Too many fears or insecurities, or will I make it out there? It's a cold, cruel world, especially in my growing up, which is very conservative. You didn't have friends outside of the church. And, outside is a very scary place. Well, then right before this crossing into this first threshold, mythology tends to have this meeting with a mentor, and it may be a supernatural mentor from above. It may be someone that's sent to aid the person. It may be an older person that accompanies them on the journey. But there's this meeting of a mentor that can give them advice and wisdom and information or items that they're going to need in the journey ahead. They're given a sword or a bow and arrow that's kind of a supernatural. Think of C.S. Lewis's The Narnia and the bow and arrow, that they each get tools to reign with. By the way, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were professors of mythology. And in fact, C.S. Lewis moves from writing theological treatises and logical apologetics to, by the end of his life, he's writing mythology, the Narnia Chronicles. He felt like it was a better way to teach through story and myth than just logic and fact. So the mentor comes along, and then it's the crossing of the first threshold. The hero leaves their ordinary world for the first time and crosses into this threshold of adventure. Campbell begins the adventure into the underworld with this encounter of a demon, a shadowy element of your own unconsciousness that guards the passage. In other words, you're confronted for the first time with your false beliefs, things that you assume to be true because that's how it was in your family. And if it's true in your family, it's true, right? It just is. And if other people have other ways, they're just wrong. That's just how it goes. So how does that happen? Well, it happens by tests. You may get allies in your fight. You also will meet enemies. The hero learns the rules of the new world. They endure tests. They meet friends and come face to face with enemies. The first test is how you'll face your shadow self, the untruths that are all you know and connect you to the home and the familiar and the safe. So when you face that, and by the way, the story is literal, but the thing that it's representing is this unraveling. And how do we face the untruth that has captured us? When somebody comes into treatment and go into addiction treatment, we talk about, we're not here for your sobriety. We're here to go after the things you're medicating for. Something is going on in your life, you don't know what to do with it. And so in that hopelessness, you have to medicate your body so you're not constantly thinking about it. And you can get some sleep and you can rest from that weary fight. So the approach, the initial plan to take on the central conflict begins. Here's where you decide to face the dark underbelly of your soul. And the conflict begins, setbacks occur that cause the hero is trying a new approach to adopt new ideas. I was reading one thing that said, we're only able to face about 20% of our belief system at a time. So how does that even 20% get exposed? I tell the veterans here, especially in moral injury, about my son, who I was working out in the driveway in Laurel when we lived there. And he was maybe 3 or 4 years old. He comes by me with this shovel with a dead bird. And he was very compassionate with animals, still is. And I knew what had happened. He goes and he comes back with an empty shovel, puts the shovel away, and then he goes back by me with a pair of scissors. And he comes back, throws something in the garbage, and then goes back by to put the scissors back inside, which probably went back in the kitchen so we could cook with them. But I said, so Josh, tell me what just happened. He said, well, I found a dead bird in the backyard and I wanted to bury it. I get that. Tell me about the scissors. And he said, well, the feet were sticking out. And so obviously what he had done was, okay, didn't quite make the hole deep enough. And so I'm going to cut off the legs, and therefore problem solved. But we do that with our trauma, with our grief. Like it's there, it's exposed to some degree, but we don't really want to dig up the bird. We just want to cut off the initial symptoms that are showing up and hope that it goes away for a while. The thing is, it just doesn't go away. It keeps popping up. And the only way to really address it is to just finally dig up the bird, which is by now mushy, stinky, even worse. But then to dig a proper burial, we've got to explore the trauma itself, the grief. So Campbell says there are two ways at this time when we face the battle. There are two things that can happen. If you defeat the demon or conciliate it, like giving it an offering or using a charm in mythology, you enter the underworld alive, which means you're alive, you have some ordinary awareness remaining. But if you're slain or dismembered, you descend in death, which means you're stripped of all your normal awareness. Like, what does it take for me finally to face my pain, my agony, my grief? And some people go down fighting. I did. I think part of me moving to California, becoming a financial advisor, and California was that far country the prodigal son ran away to. You know, California is where the prodigals run, right? So part of that was avoiding the fight. But whether you go into this grief, this trauma, alive or dead, you still go. And that's the big point Campbell is making at this point in the ordeal, is that either way you descend, and that's the most important thing. Think about the patients that you visit, who maybe they just discovered that they're palliative, or they're going into hospice, or they have cancer, don't know how that's going to turn out, or they have heart failure and weren't expecting it. And they didn't really think that their bad diet and not exercising and all that would actually catch up to them. Now that it has, they don't know what to do. And this is the thing, like, so where are they in this journey? And this is what Campbell calls a world of unfamiliar yet strangely intimate forces. When we face our untrue self, we were given at home, but won't serve us in the battles that are ahead. And he says this ordeal that we're in, this battle, these wars in the underworld, serve us in two ways. They help me undermine or defeat my former understanding of self or my world. And second, they provide me with helpers or magical aid, building or rebuilding a more soul-rooted way of being. At this point, we come to the climax that Campbell talks about, of a journey where I undergo a supreme ordeal that put a decisive end to my old self. An ego or my I, and leads to my reward, the recovery or discovery of my core soul. So the first half of that circle is confronting the falsehood that may have contributed to where I am, or even that belief, like when I went through the divorce, that, hey, a minister of God, their family is going to always be protected, because people say they're praying for us, especially, and that God fixes it, because we've given everything to this thing. And so if anybody's going to survive an ordeal like that, it's going to be a pastor. That really was my message that got exploded in this ordeal in my journey to the underworld. Well, then Campbell starts moving to the reward. After surviving the ordeal, the hero seizes a sword, a reward they've earned that allows them to take on the biggest conflict. This almost sounds like a video game, right? You know, you pick up different tools for the battle. A reward they've earned that allows them to take on bigger conflicts. It may be a physical item or a piece of knowledge or wisdom that helps them persevere. And then with that, they start to this road back. The hero sees the light at the end of the tunnel, but they're about to face even more tests and challenges. And then is the resurrection, the climax. The hero faces a final test using everything they've learned to take on the conflict once and for all. And then is the return. The hero brings their knowledge, or the elixir, back to the ordinary world, and the hero or heroine comes home more consciously aligned with your soul's purpose. Your purpose is moved from being what was expected of you to having a sacred task to perform, a gift that contributes to the healing and holding of the world. The gift you carry for others is not an attempt to save the world. I think that's what maybe we go in the first half of this circle. It's not to save the world, but to fully belong to it. What's my place in it? How can I be a part of its mission? All right, so having seen that, I'm just curious how you responded. Some of you guys may be fully aware, and this is all review for you, but how do you respond to what this process is Campbell talks about in mythology?
In simplistic terms, the way up is down.
Further down than I ever anticipated, Terry. Yeah.
Tim, thank you for bringing this in. It's a reminder that as we go through this journey and the difficulties we face, it's where we find the cracks. There's this, I also have been finding the same things that you're finding, so we should talk sometime. In different spaces. One of the spaces is there's a story of the Golden Buddha, where there was a Buddha that was in Asia that was covered with mud for years, for hundreds and hundreds of years. It had been covered, it was golden on the inside, but it had been covered in order to not be stolen or destroyed in all the wars that were going on. And it was worshipped as what it is, this clay Buddha. And at one point they were trying to move it, and cracks started appearing in the Buddha, and they were stressing about the fact this thing was cracking and breaking apart, right? Like, this was bad. And then one of the monks looked deeper and realized there was something shining through, and started chiseling, which was like a shocker to other people. Like, don't do that, right? Don't break the cracks open. And as he did, unearth the center, which was this golden Buddha. And it wasn't until the stress of the change and the disaster that everyone thought was befalling happened that the golden center was revealed, and they were able to learn one more lesson, that they were trying to learn along the journey, which is the same thing that you're talking about here, just from a different perspective. And so there's these stories, like you said, which is, this is the Golden Buddha story is the same as what you're saying, which is this outside that you're talking about, this protective shell that we put on, has to be cracked and sometimes destroyed in order to reveal the gifts that come from being able to see into that center that's always been there, right? And so even though it's always been there, from what I perceive in these stories that you're talking about, and that is that there's that the spiritual path is the path that allows us to be present in all of that, to see what is arising and not be stuck and attached to these things that we get attached to that keep us from wanting to change or find out what's in the center, because they're comfortable for us and they've given us the ability to do, in this particular case, this is where they worshiped. They did not want to have what they used for their worship to change.
Yeah.
When in the very beginning, it wasn't intended to be a clay Buddha, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that was just, this reminded me of that journey, which I share that as part of the meditation classes I give, about how these practices, they crack in and they reveal things that we've been avoiding. And then as we are present with these things that are giving us pain and suffering, we can start revealing the golden wisdom that comes out from being able to be present with that journey instead of avoiding. Like you were talking about, Tim, the guy who talked about the pain that started coming up from the class that you were in. That's the stuff that we go, either we can block it out or we can be with it and see what it's revealing to us, right? And the spiritual path is the one that allows us to be present with what's arising.
Let me ask you guys, when you visit a patient and you hear their story, and maybe this where they're at, anybody who comes into the hospital is in trauma, because we don't put people in hospitals for anything less anymore. Insurance does it. So when you see them in that, can you identify, like, if they're still in that top quarter of the circle, or if maybe they're in the underworld, or maybe they're in the break? Does this help you identify any of that?
Aren't we always in different places with different parts of the journey?
Yeah, it's not like it's one and done.
Like maybe I'm in one place with like my broken toe, and I'm in another place with my sister who I'm estranged from, and I'm in another place with my husband. So aren't we all in different places in this journey? So the question is, are we getting to the place that we're trying to help them with?
Yeah. I'm curious, anybody else have that? Or does this help you with where people are at? What's that, Terry? You're muted.
Is that legible? I can't tell. No. Well, it's a picture of a marigold growing up through a crack in a parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a card I had made up, and it says, "The cracks in our lives are often the very places where God causes beauty to grow." So
can you send a picture of that to everybody? Terry, I'd like to use
I don't know how
that.
to do that. No, I don't have the technology to do that.
The cracks in our lives.
You're pushing them.
The cracks in our lives are often the very places where God causes beauty to grow. So, yeah, it's a crack when you're in the hospital, but there's lots of cracks, like you said, I think. And
Yeah.
it's about embracing the cracks, or going down, being willing to go down into that and embrace that, because we all got cracks in our lives, and looking for the beauty. Yeah, I wish I knew how to do that, but I don't. So I can send an email.
Though, it does sound good. Have you you've heard about kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing a crack in a pot by gold, silver, or platinum? Why does it keep on doing that? Go back. which is that idea, instead of when I have a cracked glass bowl, turning it to the wall so people can't see it. Kintsugi says, no, I'm integrating it. It's actually part of my story.
Yeah. Well, I'll put
A
this in.
risky place to be. Let me just show you something, because this is, I love the fact what this does for me. Maybe you hear it in my voice, but what this does for me is it helps me to see I'm not alone. Like in a way, this normalizes the journey that I'm on, that I feel like I'm asking too many questions, or the doubts I shouldn't talk about, like is it just me, you know, that kind of thing. But this has been written about for decades, millennia. And there's I want to show you something. Some of you may know it. I wasn't a big Tolkien fan for a while, until I started reading kind of stories behind the story. But if I can, I can show you this as we wrap this up. This is an invitation to a journey scene. You may remember this. Let me know if you can't hear it for some reason. No, I can't hear it right now. There, can you hear that?
Yes.
Good morning. What do you mean? Do you mean to wish me a good morning, or do you mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or perhaps you mean to say that you feel good on this particular morning? Or are you simply stating that this is a morning to be good on?
All of them at once, I suppose. Can I help you?
That remains to be seen. I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure.
An adventure? No, I don't imagine anyone west of Bree would have much interest in adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner. Good morning.
To think that I should have lived to bid good morning my Belladonna Took's son, as if I were selling buttons at the door.
Beg your pardon?
You've changed, and not entirely for the better, Bilbo Baggins.
I'm sorry, do I know you?
Well, you know my name, although you don't remember I belong to it. I'm Gandalf. And Gandalf means... me.
Not Gandalf, the wandering wizard who made such excellent fireworks. Old Took used to have them on Midsummer's Eve. No idea he was still in business.
And where else should I be?
Well,
Well, I'm pleased to find you remember something about me. Even if it's only my fireworks. Yes. Well, that's decided. It'll be very good for you. And most amusing for me. I shall inform the others.
inform the who? What? No. Wait. We do not want any adventures here. Thank you. Not today. Not. I suggest you try over the hill or across the water. Good morning.
So there's Tolkien's idea of it introducing to an adventure that's not necessarily, hold on. this adventure that is the process of pain isn't necessarily one I would recommend for anyone, but I don't know that we have choices on it if we can do it together. So, any comments, thoughts?
Well, I just want to say thanks for sharing this, but I also think just being, I think life is about coming back to being our authentic selves and who we were created to be and our gifting and finding that. And I think for me, that is what is most helpful when I connect to patients, is just my humanity. And from my monastic background, my Benedictine monastic background, you know, in the Rule of St. Benedict, it says in the steps of humility, the way down is the way up. But I think, you know, Benedict was wise in that he knew it was in the mundane that we grow. It, you know, and it's the daily work that we're about that really is our call to nourish our soul, instead of having extravagant or big moments, but it's just those continual daily dripping moments. And I think monasticism has a lot to teach us as well about our authentic selves and who we are. But I just, you know, we're all on a journey. We're all okay. We're just growing and we're doing our best. And I think we get caught in a world of striving, in the culture of striving. And I think we need to be compassionate with ourselves.
Yeah.
And, you know, and be. And that comes from silence and meditation. And that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Well, I'm going to let you guys go. Thanks for hanging in there. This is this next weekend. I'm going on a retreat with a couple of guys where we're gonna just hang out for a couple of days, eat food, go on hikes, and talk about where we are in this journey, and see if we can be with each other a little bit more, a little bit better right now. So the only thing is, it's up in the crazy mountains, and I don't know if we'll be able to get out by the time we're done. They say there's a big snowstorm coming, but I don't know. But great being with you guys. And I see on the notes, somebody was, I think they were saying that they found Soulcraft book is free and Audible with an Audible membership. So yeah, there's one way in if you're a member there. All right, thanks for joining us. We'll see you later.